want to test it or?
Yeah, I just
Don't move from here?
You can move around, it's not like close to that. Maybe.
Alright, might as well start.
Will we get shared this tablet?
Yes, that's my first task when I get home this afternoon. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Okay, alright, let's start. Oh, slideshow.
Pulse from Brown.
Lucas is here. Those all.
What are you having a part for? What if I just put this in front of the camera?
Alright, let's start. Otherwise, time will just evaporate. Okay, thank you for coming. So, I'm just going, well, Mr. Tan's here as well, which is more than welcome to jump in at any point. We are looking at the memory police, and I've just put together some what I think might be closing ideas that you may wish to incorporate for Wednesday's SAC, and then obviously for those that are pursuing it in Section A of the exam. So this is recorded, which is good, so we can share that with all the students somehow, probably over the weekend. Okay.
I'll figure it out.
All right, first, so I'm looking at different facets of the text. I've sort of put together some comparative references. Then I'm looking at pacing, some of the ideas aligned to symbols, and I think I've also put together some... That's right. And some ideas that sort of pertain to how we can incorporate different viewpoints and the meta-narrative that sort of persists in the context of the narrative as well. All right, so I will share this. We're going to talk over it as well, so you do have, hopefully, the recording to supplement what is being presented on the slides. So first, there might be an opportunity to reflect on the central tension in the text. So I know we've been reading practices, as have the other teachers, where there's sometimes this superfluous understanding about what's happening in the text, and the memory police as this omnipotent force might be seen as being what is classifiably the central tension, but you can think about the island versus the hidden room. And if you listen to one of Ogawa's interviews about 5 or 6 years ago, she sort of hints at this as being one of the literary motivations behind her writing. So we can think about the island as, I guess, symbolic of collective amnesia. And that word collective is interesting because the island itself is a repository where collective individuals exist. And then the hidden room is clearly that manifestation, that sanctuary for memory. And we've got tensions that occur over both sorts of very different parts of the text. And it's a stark contrast between these symbols. Sorry. Okay. It is a stark contrast between these symbols. And what it does, it highlights the individual struggle for preservation against societal erasure. Okay? And that's the fundamental reason we have this sort of contrast between the two, that juxtaposition. It does highlight that struggle against societal erasure. Okay? And these two things can be seen, I guess, as microcosms of societies as well. Depends on what level of analysis you want to sort of venture into as you get into the text. Make sense? All right. More about the island versus the hidden room. The islands, if we go back to that collective amnesia, some of you are not necessarily using the language of forgetting. So it is also the representation of loss and collective forgetting, where you've got that capacity to cherish and actively preserve memories in the hidden room too. And it's a binary opposition that's sort of established through these, that sort of societal decay versus the internal personal resistance that occurs. So think about the comparisons, because there's probably scope to look at comparisons and what might be differences sort of invested in the writing throughout the course of the narrative as well. All right, hidden room, a little bit further. We've got the creation and maintenance of the hidden room as being a response to the island's pervasive amnesia, And we know it occurs at about a third into the text, maybe a little further than a third. And the memory police, they're sustained enforcement. And one of the cruxes in the text is when we've got that quite tense moment where they're searching the space, and we've got that upturned carpet, and the tension that really builds and sort of surmounts to something that's devastating for both the readers, but also that interaction that occurs between the characters. It creates a space where that casual chain of forgetting can be broken. That's sort of my interpretation. It's that casual chain of forgetting, and it is casual. And I'll talk about rising tensions and how they're dissipated very quickly soon. But we can have that severing of that casual chain of forgetting through the production of this hidden room. All right, lots of interesting words we're reading in practice pieces. The mind, the psyche, the subconscious. I think there's currency to suggest that hidden room can be a representation of that sort of process, or the selfhood. And it does protect on different levels from those sort of external forces. You know you need to write about context in some capacity, so there's an opportunity there that it does echo the influences of Anne Frank's confinements. Did you read many things of context this term? I read a few that looked at Anne Frank as well.
Yeah, I mean a couple about Anne Frank and the collective forgetting.
Yes,
The erasure.
the erasure as well. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Think about it also. This is, it's think about it in terms of context too, this human thirst for sanctuary. Okay, this is a human thirst. It's a desire for sanctuary. And I guess the enduring power of autonomy, individual agency is probably a good word to use as well. But it is this critique about humanity and humanity's thirst to survive. And that's what the hidden room is supposed to represent in sort of its punitive landscape. It's that agency, it's that autonomy, it's that thirst for survival in humanity to sort of, I don't know, to be leveraged against this backdrop of totalitarian forces. All right, ask questions on the way if you want to. Okay. Please welcome. All right, I'm switching focus now. I think there's about 6 different points, I'm looking at time, 6 different points I want to get into. This is an interesting concept, but we can think about the paradoxical nature of writing. We know you can talk about her occupation, but think about it more holistically to livelihood. And her livelihood is tied to her ability to craft stories. And the juxtaposition is that this occurs paradoxically while the world around crumbles its narrative coherence. So we've got that degradation of writing and the sort of crumbling of societal liveliness. And in the other side, you've got the narrator's sort of thirst to continue and to want to pursue writing. And so that paradox in writing is really interesting as a point of comparison too. This makes the novel, or the novella I guess, metalinguistic. Because we've got the novel within the novel, and it's about the narrator's capacity to manipulate language through the creation of the nested narrative. So this is metalinguistic by nature. And it's an interesting point if you want to focus on, I guess, the writing process or the creation of that nested, embedded narrative as well. Or I think it's called manuscript in the text as well. Yep. So think about that difference. This is fundamentally metalinguistic as a literary exercise as well. All right, and it's captioned that first part there. I make my living now from writing. So far, I've published 3 novels. And then also it seems strange that you can still create something totally new like this, just from words, on an island where everything else is disappearing. And we can contrast that with the second last page where we have that sudden burst of new things occur in the text. We've got the arrival of the knitting truck, we have the suddenly, the foundation of new vegetables and so on. So that contrast is really clear. There are glimpses of hope. There are opportunities where we do have processes that are affirming, and this is a way to consider that in that backdrop of paradoxical writing too. Okay, this is also, that second quote too is paradoxical in nature. That aligns to that idea at the top too. We've got writing in a world of disappearance. Can we appreciate that? This is writing in a world of disappearance. That's where that sort of becomes captured in that second quote that's there. And it does suggest that creation through language is a form of resistance, and I know some of you have written on resistance as practices, and that overarching desire to preserve. Okay. Good. All right. This is in a similar sort of vein, but we do have in this quote the idea that we have erosion of linguistic capacity. So words seem to retreat further and further away with each disappearance. There's lots of language in the text that is driven by finality and driven by this sort of aching disappearance, this aching sense of loss. Okay? And it's often muddled with hyperboles. We've got words like forever, seamlessly, and so on. So think about the language and the choices used, which sometimes build this atmosphere of despair. And that sort of imagery is rich there too. Words seem to retreat further and further away from disappearance. Is it personification? It sort of is. Words retreating? Yeah. So what is that personification that's sort of laid into that, that notion? And think about, if you remember the books are personified. Okay, the books are scared to crumble. They're given this buoyancy, this life. So we do have personification linked to objects and ideas that crumble and disappear in the progress of the narrative. It does accentuate the increasing difficulty of her craft, but she persists. And so we champion her more that she struggles as readers. And the struggle to maintain that connection to language. All right. And I love this quote, but I'm not talking about stories. This is real. Yeah, she asserts the tangible realities of disappearances over mere fiction. Okay, so we might be tempted to just appreciate her manuscript as fiction, but this sort of takes a different perspective. Okay, she asserts that tangible reality. This is more than fiction. And that's interesting because the text itself is, I would label it as existential. Yeah, it's a metaphorical exercise. And this sort of information asserts and it builds that narrative and our understanding as readers. Hope that makes sense.
I actually think
Please.
the words being personified in that way kind of makes it feel like far removed from the narrator. And so she has this strange relationship with language where sometimes she is in control of the language and you can use it as storytelling and resistance. But then in that particular quote, it's almost like it's an object that is disappearing from the story. So it's like that removal.
That's attached.
It's like a detached way to talk about words and language, almost like she's controls the words that she's using.
Absolutely.
So it's like a bit.
Absolutely.
Like you said before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That attached capacity is really clear. Yep, good point. All right. Third point, because I'm sort of racing through different points to sort of cover as much as possible. We've got to think about memory as, I guess, a spectrum and as a social act. Okay, it's a societal exercise. We can't see it as a literal exercise of individuals losing their memory. There is this, this brandishing by the author that this is a social act and this is a spectrum. And that's what helps us build an understanding of context and assert capacity. It's not a monolithic entity. Okay, that's important. It's not just a physiological process of erosion. It is a spectrum. Think about it in terms of the collective amnesia of the islanders. We've got R's robust generative memory as well. The quote is that his memory is reliable. Miss Tanner's, the Argentine, is reliable, versus the swamp, which I think is in a few pages later, of our unnamed protagonist. And then you've got the fluctuating eroding recall. Boys, please don't forget that last point, because some of you, what I'm reading, it's not monolithic in the sense that they forget things and it dissipates, disappears completely. The protagonist remembers things. It takes a little bit of proactive energy on R's behalf and those that can remember, but she does have bouts of memory throughout of things that she previously didn't. Okay? It's tentative, but it's still there. So remember about, I guess, the versatility of memory in this capacity. All right, it's really important to think about it. Don't forget that it's not this absolute process that vanishes. All right. In other words, please remember, memory is a nuanced process, and it's not just something that's linked to forgetting in the traditional sense. Okay, that's what makes the text difficult, but that's why I think this slide is so fundamental. There are a lot of slides left. There's lots, so I'm trying to, I know you, yeah, we'll get them done. All right, R versus the narrator's memories. This is what I was referring to. These are quotes. Please use these. You'll have capacity in your sack. R's memories, he says his memories are resilient. Yeah, his confidence. Versus the narrator, she reflects on her memories as shallow and still swamp. Now, swamp is interesting because you've got to write about language. You can refer to alliteration if you want to, but having still swamp, having the qualifier still suggests that there is moments for improvement. So she foreshadows that she has the capacity to remember, but in the current paradigm, it's not quite there. Does that make sense? In a current state of existence, it's not quite there. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's important. So we do that comparison between the two. All right. The differential capacity for memory does create a fundamental divide in perception experience, and that to me is what leads to isolation. So please don't see isolation as a broad concept. That's what leads to isolation. It's that differential capacity for memory, not the memory police as such, as a sort of omnipotent force. All right? This is why we go back to memory is a social act. Okay? That's what leads to, in my belief, that's what leads to that isolation. All right. Keep going with social act. The novel implicitly argues that memory is associated on that collective capacity for memory is eroded. Try to focus on, I'm thinking to the side. Yeah, try to think about the collective versus the individual. The collective versus the individual. Collectively, memory erodes. And if you're an individual and you retain it, you're eliminated. Some of you using the word disappeared and lost. Think about the adjectives. The books, for example, are eradicated violently. Use the language that's appropriate for the loss. They're not all just disappeared, it's too platonic. Different levels of loss occurs for different objects and individuals too. This is the very fabric of the shared reality in the text. Okay? Identity disintegrates. This is the fabric of the reality for the individuals in the text. Then we think about relationships. This is the preamble. Then relationships is where we can sort of offer a critique, because the protagonist's inability to fully grasp R's memory, I think, is one of the undercurrents of the tale. And their relationship, you can sort of judge it in whatever way you want, but that's the impact of that collective amnesia and the human, I put connection, maybe the human condition. All right? And you think about relationships in that context too. I hope I'm not going too fast. Yeah, it's very 17 minutes. All right, this is sort of an extension of that. Context doesn't have to be about specific points in history. That's really important. You do need to mention context. It's in the study design, but you can be broad. If you mention it's a commentary about the universal experience of suffering, of grief, of aging, of, I don't know, relatability, that's okay. Okay, that's a social context. It doesn't have to be historical in terms of reference to burning the books in Nazi Germany or Anne Frank's experiences. You can if you want to, but you can offer more generic ideals about social and cultural context. And that's something you may wish to draw upon, that universal experience that's threaded throughout the narrative. What's your evidence? The narrator's unnamed. So that sort of symbolizes that universality of what might be the experience you're exploring. And she also, if that doesn't sort of build the process, she also has memory loss. So she's got no name, she's lost that. And on top of that, she has memory loss. And she physically disintegrates. She can't write as well, she can't walk. So we've got sort of three layers that suggest that this is universal from a symbolic perspective. We call that meta-commentary. Okay? This is a meta-commentary. It's a commentary in different areas about a process that may be contextually defined. To build upon that, most of the islanders are also unnamed or given sort of pseudonyms like R or Old Man. So the universal experience and being anonymous is what's championed in the text. Bless you. All right. What this does, it blurs the lines between, I guess, the storyteller and the sort of subjects or the themes in the text. And you've got to make a judgment around what you want to argue as part of your sax. This is about the collective nature of tragedy. That's probably the best way to think about it, rather than the individual specifically. Yeah, this is about universal tragedy. and different elements of tragedy, be it aging, natural, or be it through brute force that the memory police sort of entail throughout their almost spasmodic interventions throughout the narrative. They're spasmodic, aren't they? Yeah. I think so. All right, pacing. I've got a few slides on pacing. Pacing's interesting. Pacing, I know I didn't cover with my class. I'm not sure if you've covered pacing. Pacing is interesting. Pacing is technically, it sort of fluctuates between structure and also language. So you can put this in and it gets you the marks, if you like, for those areas you need to write about. And it's easy. It's easy. It is slow, the text, and it's contemplative. Okay, it's something that's deliberately there for us to think and to show the mind behind the writing. That quote's really good, boys. Obviously, don't use long quotes beyond, say, 10 words or so. This sort of captures that contemplative vernacular really well. I generally begin writing at about 2 o'clock. It's very clinical. In the afternoon, and I keep it until nearly midnight. I enjoy writing slowly, one character at a time. This is the protagonist's internal world, and it builds the melancholic atmosphere. Okay, this is melancholic. It's supposed to be somber. And what it does, because you've got to write about the readers, it fully immerses us as readers into the narrative. That's the point of this. It immerses us into the narrative, and we share that melancholy authentically. Okay, we're part of that process. We share the melancholy. Geez, 20 minutes already. All right. Then we've got something different. We've got accelerated decay as a pace. Okay, so we sort of contrast this, the slow, clinical, deliberate contemplation, with that acceleration. Okay, and the decay occurs, it does accelerate. Doesn't mean that more things decay, it's the nature of the decay and the debilitation of the decay that accelerates too. Towards the end, it spirals. And it leads to that sort of inevitability and that rapid loss that we see. By the time, to the point that it's just, they're almost ambivalent about what's happening. By the time their right arm disappeared, people were less troubled than they had been with the experience of their left legs. I mean, it seems almost like a scientific clinical observation, but underneath that is profound loss and capacity to process what might be seen as grandiose failure. Yeah, because they can't move, they can't activate as they normally would. So this is really accelerated by this point. All right, what's the point of this? I think the shifting pace mirrors the increased urgency in the novel. And that's where we can talk about context. That sometimes, socially, culturally, historically, we have opportunities where people are marginalised and it occurs at such an accelerating pace, we lose sight in terms of what's actually happening. So this mirrors the urgency in the novel. That's the point of having this level of this acceleration in the pace. Okay. So I'm trying to give you lots of stuff for context that hopefully you can bring to Wednesday's SAC in a few days. All right, more about this, rhythm and apathy. I'm sure some of you already picked this up, but when there's a lot of tension in the text, it goes away very quickly. We don't have tension, and then there's sort of this this increase in rebellion, this desire to upset it. It disappears very quickly. Okay? So I put the novel's rhythm often dissipates tension rather than build it, which is very unconventional for a narrative that's so built on violence and decay. The memory police, this is my example, follows with a quick return to acceptance, only a few sentences later. The narrator's tears, which helps, described as not sadness, but a release of accumulated thoughts. So even the sort of catharsis after the raid, which is crying, the way it's described as not being one of sadness or despair, but one of a release of accumulated thoughts. It dissipates, attention stops, and we move on to the next thing. Okay? It's episodic, in other words. All right, what's the point of this? It reflects what you might call pervasive apathy, okay? That the insidious nature of these appearances are absorbed into what I said to my class, a normalised society. This is a normalised society. This is normal to them, okay? This is completely normalised. And this is a collective apathy. They can't Apathy is probably one step up for ambivalence. There's no sort of emotional recourse based on it. It's normal to them, in other words. All right, and I've used that expression, excuse me, collective emotional numbness. And that's what we get from the text too. There's that sort of global numbness. If you want to use that in your SACs, by all means, context. Societies can be subtly disarmed, it is subtle, and controlled, not necessarily by brute force, but by that pensive, systematic erosion of its capacity to outwardly express emotions. Okay? It's a really interesting point, and it just shows you can put context in fairly accessibly without having to worry too much about historical narrative and historical detail. Is this helpful? I'm just trying to give you, okay. I've got maybe there's heaps left. All right, I might have to rush, I won't get it all done. Imagery, there's lots of imagery examples. So for some reason, students shy away from imagery. It is just as reliable as a language technique, as a metaphor or a motif or a similar personification. Imagery is really powerful and it's easy. So please, if you're struggling with language features, write about imagery. Imagery is very accessible and it's so rich in this text anyway. You've got lots of sensory imagery. You've got olfactory through the smells of the perfume. You've got general sensory, strange, almost rough about the quality of air. I think that's the third last page in the text. Visual imagery, love that example of the spluttering engines of market trucks empty after the point that it's